Hello again, and thank you so much for joining me on Sparringpod. My name is Hallgeir Gustavsen, and today I have another international guest. Phillip is the principal and CCO of Verhaal Brand Design, a consultancy specializing in strategic graphic design and brand development. For over 20 years, he has helped Fortune 100 companies, entrepreneurs by creating award-winning work, launching new products, and establishing brand ecosystems. Thank you so much for joining me, and welcome, Phillip.
Hey, Hallgeir. It's great being here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, I have to say, I told you before you went live, but this is, I'm feeling a bit fanboy right now because I've been following you on YouTube for at least, I think the 2018 video, where it said what things will happen in 2018, was the first video I watched from you.
Wow, so, that was a long time ago.
A lot of things have happened. How have you been?
I've been great. Thanks a lot. It's been a wild ride being a digital entrepreneur for the last 4 or 5 years. There's huge change from my past, so I'm sure we're going to get into that. But yeah, it's been great. It's been amazing. A lot of stuff has been happening. So I'd love to share all about it.
Cool, because you have been working with graphic design and designing in quite a while. You started 20 plus years ago.
Yes, I actually started as a painter. I have my master's degree in painting, and I went into the fashion industry putting some of my artwork on t-shirts, and kind of came into graphic design through the back door of t-shirt design, and then discovered that being a creative director was a lot like being a teacher. I originally wanted to be a teacher. And so I started working at t-shirt companies and became a graphic designer, and then became a graphic design manager, and then kind of worked my way up through the fashion industry for about 15 years. And then went over to the branding agency side. And then I came back to the corporate side. So it's been kind of a circuitous pathway. Yes. But yeah, I've had a 25 plus year career.
Yeah, because you have worked with some really, really big brands, like if I had Gap, Old Navy, Chevron, Dockers at Levis, Microsoft, Seagate, Coca-Cola, Campbell, Warner Brothers. It's basically the who's who of the biggest, largest brands in the world, basically. What is your main takeaway from working with the really big brands, and how do you take that into working with entrepreneurs and that?
Sure. I mean, the principles of branding and the principles of brand strategy are, I learned it in these really large settings, right? Working with global agencies and global companies on massive projects and brands. And then when I started my own agency, I figured I'd kind of done the big company thing and decided to start working with small to medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs. And the principles of branding and brand strategy and marketing are exactly the same. It's just a matter of scale, right? It's just a matter of the budgets, and it's a matter of the number of people who are involved, and the number of people who have to have their thumbprint on it, or the number of people who have to approve the work. It's and also the amount of revenue you get from doing the work. But it's really a matter of scale. So when I started working as a digital entrepreneur for myself, building my own brand as well as building brands for other people, I essentially took those processes and methodologies that I used with these really large companies and scaled them down so they could be used by smaller companies, and they could receive the same kind of benefits from that thinking and that strategy that these large companies pay hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for. And that's been really rewarding. And I think it was sorely needed, specifically in the kind of entrepreneur and solopreneur space, for people to think about their brands in that sort of way.
If we delve a bit deeper into that, can you tell me a bit about how you think around pricing, because that's one of the main difficulties I have with understanding, or not understanding, explaining to my clients what's the difference between, because if you go to Fiverr, you can get a logo designed for $5, and if you go to like a big design agency, you can get a logo for $250,000, no problem. I sometimes, not all of the time, of course, but sometimes you can show me designs, and sometimes I wouldn't exactly know which was which, and that for me would be a big problem. How do you think about pricing?
Well, the difference between, a $250,000 logo and a $5 logo is generally pretty significant, and for the
Yes,
most part,
yes.
I can tell the difference between the two.
Yes, you can.
But one of the things about working with the crowdsourcing and companies of the world, the Fivers, 99 Designs, Upwork, is you don't necessarily know where that work came from. I've seen a lot of instances of pirated designs, of designs that have been pulled out of logo books, stolen from other people's Pinterest pages.
Yeah.
So you have no assurance that that work is original, number one. And number two, really what separates the men from the boys in that situation is that when there's a difference between aesthetic design and strategic design. Aesthetic design is essentially picking a nice font, a color that the client likes, and some sort of an icon or picture or something like that. And it's completely a subjective decision around what the client likes.
Yeah.
And as a designer, that's a completely subjective process, meaning the designer has no power or no say in that. They can design what they design, but if the client doesn't like it, there's nothing that they can say that will change that person's mind. When you talk about strategic design is centered around an objective decision process. It's centered around who the customer is, what the category of business is, what does the competitive landscape look like, what are those competitors doing, where are they moving in the competitive landscape, how are you trying to position yourself as a company within that competitive landscape? Are you premium? Are you value? Are you middle of the road somewhere? Yeah. What are the semiotics? So the visual, the visual indicators of your visual branding. What is the tone of voice of your brand? How do you come across in copy, and how do you come across, when you speak or show up on social media? Those sorts of things are all driven by a core of a brand's strategy. All those decisions that are made in developing those branding assets are based on that strategy. And so many of those decisions are very objective decisions. They're not purely aesthetic decisions. So that's really the difference between those two. And, very much the difference between a pretty picture and a brand that's going to perform for you in the marketplace the way that you want it to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I normally have you heard about the guy who owns this big factory, and there's this machine that's broken, and every day that machine is standing still, the company is losing loads and loads of money. So they get the specialist in, say, can you fix this machine? And he's, yes, of course I can fix it. And yeah, please fix the machine. And he takes out a small hammer and he boinks the machine, and it works again. And they're really happy about this. And yes, please, this was really good, thank you. And he sends them an invoice for 100K, and they're like, but you just hit the machine with a small hammer. We will need like a detailed invoice. So he said, hitting the machine with a hammer, $100. Knowing where to hit it, $99,900. So I'm thinking it's a bit like that for the strategic designer.
It very much is. And, there's a similar story in when people describe what they do. I mean, when you talk to a client, they say, hey, it only took you a few hours or it took you a week to design that logo. Why is it going to cost me $10,000 or $25,000? You say, well, you're not paying for the hours it took to design the logo. You're paying for the 20 years of experience that I have that are going to make that logo perform for you in the marketplace the way you want it to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also say that when you actually find agency or a designer that knows their craft and knows how to work, you pay for the process of getting there. That's one of the things. Peter says hi to you, by the way. Let's see if we can add this.
Peter, oh, can I see the chat here too? Let me see. Let me see. Expose. Can I see the chat? Yes, I can. Peter Lewis, awesome. He is one of my most diehard mastermind members. He's a member of my Brand Design Masters Guild, which is one of the masterminds that I run.
Hello, Peter. Nice to have you also on the broadcast. Okay, if we go into the space-time continuum, where we take a look at the past, the now, and the future, how did you get to where you are today? Like, what was the most significant thing that happened to you in the past that was most defining for you?
Wow, that's a really big question. I think one of the biggest was when I went from being a fine artist to putting my stuff on T-shirts for sale, and that was I went from creating artwork that was purely for me and essentially an expression of what was in my head, and creating artwork that was supposed to speak to other people, was supposed to people were going to be willing to lay down their hard-earned cash to buy a piece of my work. And this piece of work happened to be on a T-shirt, which they would then put on their bodies and walk around the streets of New York with it on. And I think one of the most defining moments is when I was on my honeymoon, actually, in the British Virgin Islands, and I went to breakfast, and we were going and down this big, lovely buffet. And I was working at Old Navy at the time, and the work that we were doing there had incredible exposure because we printed hundreds of thousands of shirts. And I went to breakfast, and a guy was across from me going down the buffet line who had one of my T-shirts on. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I didn't say anything to him. And then the next morning I went to breakfast again. The same guy was there, but he had a different T-shirt on, and it was another one of our shirts and a different design in the same group. And that, seeing your work out there in the world and seeing people enjoy it and seeing it mean something to people's lives has always been one of those things that just really energizes and inspires me. And I get the same inspiration when I go to the pet food store and see a private label pet food brand that we designed on the shelf. I just love that stuff. So I love putting out inspiring and quality work into the world, and seeing it be enjoyed and be used and be of value to people's lives. So that was one big one. I would say probably the other major one is when I went from the fashion industry, which is a very emotional, very kind of fast moving type of industry, into the strategic branding agency side, where I was working with a lot of really large clients, like some of the ones that you listed at the beginning of the show. And where it became a much less emotional and much more process driven branding and design and strategy driven kind of experience for working with clients. And so that was also a big change too, because I'd spent 15 years in the fashion industry, which is not super strategic. They are based on like what's hot, what's trending, what's the competition doing, and you move very, very quickly. It's not super cerebral.
It's a very emotionally based. Or is that the presumption?
I mean, it's still products, so you got to put out what in the world people are going to buy. And it's, it's a lot of money and a lot of product and a lot of shipping and logistics and things like that. But it's building, a fashion line is very, it's time bound. when you're building a brand like Coca-Cola or PepsiCo or Chevron, it's a brand that's going to last decades. And so you have to put in a lot more thought into something that's going to be out there for decades than something that's going to be out there on the shelf for a month.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that's why we can see both the seasonal change and the 90s fashion and the aughts fashion and 80s fashion. It's very different, and you get these very volatile, I think would be a correct word, volatile movements in those kind of industries. But if you went back even further to 12-year-old Philip, what would you say to him?
Don't be so hard on yourself, just follow what, this is what I tell people a lot. And I wish I could have told my 12-year-old self this, which is don't worry so much about what your passion is. Think about what you're curious about. And I've said this on other shows, but a lot of people, young designers in particular, feel like they lack confidence in their decision making, and they lack confidence in choosing the thing that they think, they say, if you work in your passion, you'll never work a day of your life, right? But passion, the idea of passion carries so much psychological weight that it freaks people out, and it paralyzes them in not being able to make a decision about their lives. And so what I counsel people that I coach and people in my masterminds to follow what you're curious about, because if you follow what you're curious about, it will lead you down the same pathway, but it will lead you through a series of movements and changes and different circuitous routes that is going to get you to where your passion is, but it's not going to paralyze you or freeze you in your tracks. So that's what I would tell myself. I would tell myself to, not to be so hard on yourself and follow your curiosity.
What kind of things about the Philip you are today do you think 12-year-old you would be most impressed about?
Oh, wow. Probably all the cool tech that I have. I mean, when I was a 12-year-old, I was a guitar player, still am a guitar player, and a musician. And I, coveted recording equipment and guitars and amplifiers and microphones and all the stuff that I wanted to eventually buy. And I have all that stuff now. I have it all in spades. I have the recording equipment, I have the cameras, I have the guitars, and, to 12-year-old me, I'm like really styling.
Thank you, Daniel.
Hey, Daniel, how are you? Good to see you, man.
But is there anything about you today that you think 12-year-old you would be embarrassed about?
Wow, embarrassed about that I've lost all my hair.
Well,
I think that you got me beat by about a millimeter, but I send, sometimes if I know people really well, I'll send them a picture of myself when I was about 25 years old. I had long flowing brown locks of hair for, until I was in my late 20s. And I had really nice hair.
Yeah.
Now my 12-year-old self would be really freaked out, I think, by looking at my head.
That's very funny.
That's, no, I don't think I think my 12-year-old self would be okay with who I turned out to be.
Yeah, 'cause I like that because you shouldn't be, how to put it, the only thing I think for me that I would be embarrassed about is the humor I've adapted, because my humor now is exactly like my father's humor used to be, and I was so embarrassed about him and his dad humor. So
right.
For me it would be totally that, because it's I've basically turned into my father in the humor department. But let's see. I think I have one. Look at this.
Nice. Wow. No, that is not you.
Yeah, that's
that
me.
is amazing. Oh my goodness.
I think
Wow,
that's
you've gotten a little more fit, that's for sure.
yeah, that's 13, 14 years ago,
Wow.
and 60 kilos ago, and maybe a meter of hair ago.
Yeah, a little
So
bit of hair.
yeah, but I just started to shave it, so I can say it's by choice.
Okay, good.
Uh, Peter says you and him have the same hairstyle, so
We do,
that's good.
we do. That I know is true.
But okay, what what things that you have right now do you hope you could take with you into your future? Then what do you hope to still possess when you get like really old?
I think I think being energized by inspiration. I think that I'm a rabid consumer of inspiration, and
Hmm.
I'm always looking at imagery and looking at other at video and motion design and product design, graphic design, and every single day, even though I've been in this industry for 30 plus years, I am always excited, inspired, juiced by something that I see
I love that.
and inspired to, you know, to try it, to explore how that person got to that particular piece, or to try to recognize where that piece is living in the continuum of the history of design. Like you said, one of the ways that you came across me was a trend video I did on YouTube, and I'm actually working on my 2021
Good.
trend video for
Looking
YouTube right
forward to
now.
it.
And one of the things I learned in the fashion industry is how to recognize trends, how to see trends as they're happening.
Yeah.
And um, that is an outgrowth of my interest in being inspired, is because I'm constantly looking, I'm constantly making connections in my head in terms of what I'm seeing and where it's falling in this kind of sea of visual noise that we're always exposed to. And that's something I hope I never lose.
So if we delve even deeper into your inspirations, could you go into what things that inspire you in everyday life?
Sure. I mean, the funny thing is that, and this is where I think my training as a fine artist comes into it, is
Hmm.
that I am inspired by anything. When I lived in New York City, I used to be inspired by, in some places in New York City, you can see the remnants of painted billboards on the side of brick buildings that date back hundreds of or over 100 years. And sometimes those little ghosted images of designs or hand painted fonts or imagery or illustration you can see, and I would be incredibly inspired by it, just again in that continuum of design. But then I could be just as inspired by how a particular Coke can got smashed in the street by a taxi cab and embedded into a bunch of tar that was used to repair the street. I mean, I can be inspired by the simplest and most kind of bizarre and mundane things as I can by something that was intentional. I'm incredibly inspired by product design, by visual design, both moving and static. I'm really inspired by people who are great teachers or great inspiring speakers. I listen to a lot of music, so I pull a lot of inspiration from the music I listen to, and so I gather it from everywhere. And I think that is what makes a great creative, is not drawing kind of boundaries and saying I only get my creative inspiration from looking at communication arts magazine annuals,
Yeah.
or whatever that is. I really kind of span the gamut, and I think that's what makes life interesting for creative people.
What qualities in people inspire you then?
Um, what qualities in people? Curious people. I like
Yeah.
people who are willing to try and
Yeah.
willing to fail. One of my, one of my biggest sayings that I love to say is you have to dare to suck. And the reason why I say that is because when you're just, there's a lot of times where people want to do something or they have an idea they want to try out. But if it's on social media, on a YouTube channel or a podcast, or, writing a blog post or hitting publish, they freeze and they get very frightened about
Yeah.
how people are going to judge them or what people are going to say about them, how good people are going to think it is. And whenever anyone does anything, the first time you do it, you're going to suck, right?
Yeah.
The first 10 times you do it, you're going to suck. And in social media or anyway, in digital entrepreneurship, those sucking moments just happen to be a little more visible to the general public, right?
Yep.
But you have to go through those steps. You have to get out there. You have to try. You have to start, and you have to suck. And then over time, you get better and better and better. And at your 20th video or podcast, you're going to look back to that first and you're going to say, oh my God, I can't believe I put that out there. But you're also going to realize how far you've come.
Yeah.
And you can't progress until you start. So I really admire in people the guts to get out there and be bad and hit publish and start that journey, because it's a terrifying moment. I mean, going back to one of your earlier questions,
Yep.
Hallgeir, is, what was one of those defining moments in my life? About 4 or 5 years ago, one of the defining moments in my life is when I hit publish on my first YouTube video. I mean, I was a very senior executive at, one of the top 5 companies in the world. I had a lot of visibility, and I was putting myself out there as an individual without that company's name on my business card. And I was terrified about being judged, whether people thought that I knew what I was talking about, imposter syndrome, whether
Yeah.
my old colleagues were going to see it, whether my old clients were going to see it, what they would say, what they would think. And making that leap to hitting publish and starting on a new journey and daring to suck, at something brand new for the guy who was pretty advanced in his career was terrifying. But I did it. And now I have, probably over 250 videos on YouTube and a couple 100,000 subscribers, and I'm in a very different place. But hitting that publish, button at the first was, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it now. And I wish that for anybody. I wish that experience for anybody.
So, what things specifically do you do that you think and hope can inspire others?
Everything that I do right now is intended to inspire others. I'm literally everything that I do. I have my own agency, so I work with small to medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs to help build their strategic brands. So I'm seeking to inspire them to greater heights. I have a Facebook group, the Brand Design Masters Facebook group, where creative professionals and entrepreneurs can join and mingle and communicate with each other, inspire each other. I obviously teach on YouTube and have been for years and years now. I have my own podcast, as you may know, the Brand Design Masters podcast. I also do webinars. I host paid mastermind groups. A number of the viewers who are here right now are members of that. So I teach, I mentor, I help inspire and push people to greater heights in what they want to do with their lives, whether that's in a creative, creative professional mode, or whether that's in an entrepreneurial mode, in any range of categories. That is what I love doing. I love helping people to get to another level. And that's what gets me up every morning. And to tell you the truth, I'm working harder than I ever have in my life. But I am enjoying what I'm doing more than I ever have in my life. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, who I'm helping, what I'm producing in my life more than I ever have in my previous, 20 years of my career in big corporate and big agency life.
And I think that doing just that, working hard to inspire others, doing your best to influence people in a good way, I think that's one of the things that gives the strength to actually work better than you have done before. Peter is still commenting. Best career propulsion encouragement mentor. Best corner of the solar system. I love
CPAM.
that. I love that. So, what other people have inspired you in these ways? I know you had on one of your podcasts you had the Upreneur name.
Yeah, Chris Tucker.
Yeah, Tucker. Yes.
Yeah, Chris. And he's usually one of the first that I mention. He was one of the first people that I deeply engaged with when I went kind of out on my own. I came across Chris Tucker's name on Pat Flynn's podcast. The journey that people go through when they go into this sort of life is kind of the same. They either start off on kind of John Lee Dumas's, Entrepreneur on Fire, or Pat Flynn's podcasts. And there is a very kind of closed system. I like to call it the social media mafia, where everyone kind of knows each other and shares each other on each other's podcasts, like you and I are doing right now. And the names start to become familiar. And so I heard about Chris Tucker. He said he was starting a mastermind group called Upreneur. And so he happened to be coming to Philadelphia, which is, a couple hours from where I live, for a conference. And he said, anyone who wants to come down and meet me, do. So I went down and I met him, and he was just starting Upreneur. And he told me about it, and I just was really impressed by his whole vibe and energy. And so I joined Upreneur, and that mastermind experience did more to kind of catapult my own development than probably anything I did in the first couple of years that I was out on my own. So I credit him a lot with kind of setting me on a righteous path to growth. And there's other people that I'm really inspired by. Roberto Blake, who's a YouTuber I'm good friends with and super inspired by. Chris Do, of course, another friend and incredible mentor in the design industry. Amy Landino used to be named Amy Schmidauer, but Sexy Savvy Social, she was a big influencer on me in the very beginning. There's a lot of YouTubers who were, as well as podcasters, and they taught me, they served as great examples for what to do to build a content empire and a personal brand.
Yeah, and I think you've been doing that very well the last couple of years. But when you are trying to come up with these ideas, do you have a process for doing that, or are you just one of these luck-driven guys that just wanders around and then suddenly, aha, eureka?
Yeah, eureka. Yeah, it's no, I don't get struck by lightning. Inspiration, no, very few creatives or content producers that I know are struck by lightning, struck by inspiration. Inspiration doesn't come to you. You have to go out and hunt it down.
Yeah.
That's what I like to say. And I think about the people that I'm trying to help, and I listen to the people that I'm trying to help and what their struggles are, what they want to know about. And I ask them, I say, what are you struggling with? What is it that's going to really help you? And then I try to develop content and offer my opinion and give guidance to people in the areas that they think that they're really going to need assistance. The other thing that I have to do as a kind of mentor or a design leader is I have to have my antenna up to what I think is important for them to know, the kind of hurdles I'm experiencing, the kind of successes that I'm having, how I achieved those things, and share them with them, to try to be looking a little farther down the road than where they're looking for what new opportunities might be there for them, or what kind of hurdles they might be coming up to face, and prepare them to handle those things better. And one of the things I've been doing for a couple of years now is trying to prepare creative professionals for the massive change that we're seeing in the design industry, which is, large agencies are contracting, and the consultant economy is having a deep, deep effect on them. And there's this rise of the consultant class and creative professionals, and preparing people for what it takes to do that or to succeed in that kind of environment has been something that I've been paying a whole lot of attention to, because there's nothing worse. And this has happened to me a few times in my life. There's nothing worse than getting laid off with no warning because your agency lost a client, or because there was a downturn in the economy, and suddenly you're out on the street with 2 weeks severance and you're looking for another job. Having no control over your destiny really sucks.
Yeah.
And so I try to prepare people to have as much control over their professional destiny as they possibly can.
Yeah. Daniel is on inspiration. Creativity is a blue-collar job. Those eureka moments don't exist, in my humble opinion, as creativity is the product of a lot of hard work. I totally agree, Daniel, and I'm sure Philip also is agreeing on this, because I'm thinking the actual thinking and the process around it is something you have to go through to craft an idea, because good ideas are crafted.
Yeah, and not every idea is a good idea.
No,
That's the other thing. You know, it's like when you're developing design, you develop 40 designs and you come up with 6 or 8 that you're going to show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much the same thing with inspiration. Is you may have 10 ideas, and you may have to kind of sort through them and find the 1 or 2 that are really going to be of value to people, or really be inspiring for you to create.
Yeah, I recently came up with the concept of, because I feel that I get these eureka moments all the time, but I have some years ago I have realized that even if you get an idea, the idea most likely is raw. That's how I like to view it. It's a raw idea that needs to be worked on to even see if it can become something. It's like a lump of dough, and you can knead it and you can stretch it out. You can add some pizza sauce, you can add some cheese, then you can put it in the oven, and then you will figure out if it was a good idea or not. But if you just stand around eating dough, nobody will hire you and you won't get very far.
And then you'll look like that picture of Hallgeir when he was
that's correct.
twice as heavy.
But okay, what is the best idea you ever had?
Is this the start of those 20 questions? Because you said they were going to be hard, and that's a really hard question.
These are the easy ones.
Wow. I think the best idea I ever had was to start a YouTube channel. To tell you the truth, because when I was just starting out, I was thinking podcast, YouTube, and I had to make the decision between one of the two. I now have both, but in the beginning, it was like design is a visual language. I have to show things that are visual in order to get things across that I want to talk about. Yeah. So I went with YouTube, and that has opened up an amazing audience for me. It's created, incredible amount of open doors for me. And it's given me an outlet for my creativity and to share my knowledge with people. It's acted as an amazing business development tool for my agency. It's acted as amazing kind of audience builder for masterminds and groups that I run. And it's just incredibly gratifying. I mean, I want to tell you a very quick story.
Yes, please.
I just recently, in the last couple months, been unable to keep up with the volume of comments that I got on my YouTube channel. But for a good 4 years, I answered every single comment that I got on every single video that I did. Tens of thousands of comments, because I really wanted to value my viewers and value them as my audience and give value back to them and to engage in a real conversation. But the thing about the internet, that old New Yorker cartoon where there's 2 dogs and they're sitting at a computer, and one of the dogs is looking at the other one and he says, "Hey, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog." it's the same very much thing. You can kind of position yourself very opaquely on the internet. And so I received this comment from someone that said, I did a very popular video called What Does a Creative Director Do?
Mm-hmm.
And I received a comment on it from someone who said, I'm thinking about becoming a creative director. And, one of the things I was curious about was, is it better to work in a company or an agency? And how would you go about that? And so I gave them, a 2 or 3 sentence kind of feedback on their question.
Yeah.
I said, you might want to do blah, blah, blah with your career, or talk to your manager, or, develop a network of subject matter experts, or I can't remember exactly what I said. But then when they responded back to me, they said, well, I'm only 12, so I'm just really starting out. And I was like, oh my God. Here I was like responding to this person like they were 28 mid-career,
Yeah.
and they were like 12 years old. And I just love that. I love the fact that my creative director video inspired a 12-year-old to think about like what the next step is. I just thought that was awesome.
But okay, on the other side of the aisle, then, what's the
Yeah.
worst idea you ever had?
Oh boy. The worst idea I ever had. I don't know. I'm going to have to come back to that one.
Okay,
I'm going to have to
let's do
come
that.
back to that one.
And then we start the 20 quick questions. It's
Okay.
inspired. It's
Boy. All right. So then it's going to get really hard.
Yeah, it's
All right.
inspired by Marcel Proust, so most likely there is some nuggets of gold in here. Hopefully.
Okay.
What is your most marked characteristics?
My what?
Your most marked characteristic.
Marked?
Yeah, marked. Your most. How would people characterize you?
I think serious. I've gotten that a lot in my life. People have called me very serious. So I come across as being serious. I'm not actually that serious a person, but I have that vibe. Or professorial. That's the other one I get, is that, I come across as a professor, which is good because that's kind of what I am.
Yeah, but I think really knowledgeable people often come off as serious because they know their shit. So it's easy to come off as serious then. What quality do you most like in a person?
Creativity.
What do you most value in your friends?
Honesty.
What is your principal defect?
This is like such a classic like job interview question. But I think my biggest defect is that I'm a workaholic, and sometimes I have a hard time turning off.
What is your favorite or most admired occupation?
My most admired occupation would be a professional scuba diver, because I love scuba diving. And when I was a kid, when I was 12, I wanted to be Jacques Cousteau, and I still want to be Jacques Cousteau. So if I had one calling that I missed, it was to be an oceanographer. So that, I think, is probably the coolest profession that there could be.
What is your definition of happiness?
Feeling like you are enough.
In your mind, what would be the greatest misfortune?
The greatest misfortune. I think being alone. Being entirely alone.
Yeah, I would guess either that or becoming blind or losing your mental acuity would be my guess for you, since you're being inspired so much by what you see and take in. How would you like to be remembered?
As a teacher.
That's
as a good teacher.
Yeah, as a good teacher. That's even better.
Yeah, not just a teacher, as a favorite teacher.
In what country would you like to live?
Oh, that's easy. Switzerland.
Hmm.
I visited Switzerland when I was in my early 30s and took a train through Switzerland, and it was probably one of the most amazing
It is
countries I've
amazing.
ever seen.
Did any of the trains ever not go on time for you?
In Switzerland?
Yeah,
No.
I've been there a couple of times, and once there was like the time was 1 minute after it was supposed to leave the station, and all the Swiss people were like, "What has happened?" There's some, and people were almost having heart attacks because it's like,
Japan's like that too. They'll
"Where's the
like
train?"
make incredibly heartfelt apologies if the
Yes.
train doesn't come in like 30 seconds on time.
Yeah. What is your favorite color?
My favorite color is turquoise.
Who is your favorite writer?
Boy, that's really hard. Um, all right, I'm going to think about this. Well, my favorite writer right now is and well, okay, I'm going to go back to that. One of my favorite writers is a guy named Richard Prenneke. And Richard Prenneke wrote a book called One Man's Wilderness. He went up to Alaska in the 60s and built a cabin in the middle of the wilderness and kept a journal and published a book called One Man's Wilderness, which I've read probably 10 times. And it's one of the most amazing books I've ever read, probably because it's such a romantic idea. But the funny thing is he was all alone. He was totally alone most of the time, but he lived an incredible life and kept an amazing journal. If anyone's thinking about reading a really inspiring book, read One Man's Wilderness by Richard Prenneke.
Perfect. Who are your favorite fictional heroes?
Oh, my favorite fictional heroes. Well, Batman. And this was before all the movies. I'm old enough to know, having watched, Batman on television in the 60s. And so, the Batman, the Bruce Wayne, the alter ego, multimillionaire, but then real cool superhero, like it doesn't get any better than that, right?
No. Who's your favorite musician?
That's easy. Jimi Hendrix.
Who is or was your favorite artist?
That's kind of a toss-up between Otto Dix and Max Beckmann.
Who are your heroes in real life?
My heroes in real life. Well, one of my heroes was my dad, who's passed, but he was a huge influence on me. Wow, people that I idolize. I'm reading the first book of Barack Obama's A Promised Land, and I think that he personifies just about everything that I think I admire in a human being, so he's definitely one.
What do you most dislike?
What do I most dislike in general? Arrogance.
What historical figure do you most despise? One caveat: I don't think we're allowed to say Hitler, because everyone goes for Hitler. So someone else.
Despise. Okay, Genghis Khan. He
good
wasn't a nice dude.
No,
was not
he
a nice
was
dude.
Not. What natural gift would you most like to possess?
Oh, a natural gift. I would love to be able to be a really great singer. I've always wanted to be a really great singer. There's some people who are just natural, who can just sing like, unbelievably. And that's something I've always wanted to possess.
How would you like to die?
Wow. Painlessly.
What vice do you have that you most like to give into?
That's an interesting question. What advice do I have?
Yeah, that you like to give into. Like, as you saw in the picture earlier, I really enjoyed gluttony.
What vice? Sorry. Okay, what vice do I give into?
No, that you like to give
Yeah.
into. Because a
Well, I
lot of
like to
people
give into.
have
I like.
vices. Yeah.
Yeah. I like to give into sloth. Like when I turn off, I really turn off. Like I can definitely do like 4 hours of Netflix on a couch on a Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
I can definitely do that.
And then we were back at the worst idea Philip ever has had.
Okay.
That's
Oh
the last
man, you
question.
brought it back.
Yes,
You
of
brought it
course, we
back.
bring it back.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I hadn't had a chance to think about it. The worst idea I ever had.
Let's see if what Peter says. He says, "I'm an excellent interviewer.
Okay. Okay. Here
Keep
it
him on
is.
the hot seat."
I got it. All right. Now this is a real story, Hallgeir.
Okay.
The worst idea I ever had. I was working on an archaeological dig on Crete when I was in grad school, and it was an amazing experience. And we worked all day on an uninhabited island off the northern coast of Crete. It was 100 degrees, very hot. We sweat like crazy. And then we would come back to the little coastal town in Crete, and we would, have lunch. We'd drink a whole bunch of beers. We'd get a little buzz on before we'd have to do like our kind of our land-based work in archaeology, going, cataloging and drawing things and stuff like that. And one afternoon, we didn't have to do that work, so I decided to tie one on, and I got pretty drunk. And they happened to rent windsurfers in this little village, and so I decided to go windsurfing drunk, and that was a really bad idea. I had not windsurfed much in my life, and I ended up falling off the windsurfer onto my side and cracking a couple ribs on the edge of the windsurfer. And so for the next 2 weeks of the dig, I had to work standing up with my middle wrapped by a gigantic ace bandage in incredible pain, drawing architectural drawings of ruins of a Minoan fishing village. And that was excruciatingly painful. So going windsurfing while drunk in Crete was the worst decision I ever made. How's that?
Thank you so much.
There you go.
That's a good story. And with that, I'm thanking you so much for joining me. If you want to say anything to the watchers, listeners, anyone out there, now's your time.
Sure, absolutely. So if anyone is interested in learning more about who I am, what I teach, how I can help you as a creative professional or entrepreneur, you can join the Brand Design Masters Facebook group on Facebook. You can look at my videos on YouTube. I'm under my name, Phillip VanDusen. And I also have a podcast, the Brand Design Masters podcast, which I'd love you to check out. And that's my website on the screen. Thank you for doing that. Didn't even have to announce that. And Hallgeir, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your having me on the show. And this has probably been one of the most unique interviews I've had. And I've had a lot in the last few years. So that's awesome.
If you can stick around to just after the outro, I'll see you guys later, and have an awesome night.